All right, gang, it's time for another TMC optimization session, Wednesday, June the 23rd, 2021. And today is Podcast Pitching 101 with our very own Christina Lenkowski. Christina, thank you for agreeing to do this.
Yeah, I felt like that was a real mom move I just made, so apologize in advance to everyone there.
Well, maybe we'll feel nurtured when this is all over.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Perfect. Okay, well, it's all you, Christina.
Okay, perfect. So, hello, fellow masterminders. Hi. I know I've kind of seen some of you before. I'm on the West Coast, so I do the other mastermind time that we have because I'm not an early riser. So it's nice to see some of you guys here, and I'm excited to train today on what I do for a living, which is get my clients booked on podcasts. And I also have a membership as well, where I teach solopreneurs how to get booked on podcasts themselves. So the training I'm doing today is a 2-hour, well, it's typically a 2-hour training. We're gonna knock it down to an hour and a half for today. So you should have your workbooks, which I know Perry sent out a couple times. If you don't have it, let me know. I also have a link to the file as well. If you weren't able to print it off, don't worry. You can just open up a Google Doc or write down, in a notepad or something like that, your thoughts that you have as we go through. But if you're like me, a lot of thoughts will come up as you go through trainings and things like that. So I always like to kind of keep that stuff at hand and written down, especially because we're going to talk about topic ideas. So hopefully you're going to get inspired to think about some topic ideas that will make sense in your business. Okay, so I'm going to do first and foremost what I do in every training, and that is I want to know, where are you with pitching yourself to podcasts? So A, B, C, or D. You've never pitched yourself to a podcast. You can put this in the chat, or you can unmute. You've pitched yourself a couple times, but it's never gone anywhere. I've been on a podcast before, but they asked me to, or I've guested on multiple podcasts and pitched myself. So you can either put in the chat or you can unmute and let me know where you're at right now. A lot of C's. Okay, awesome. I figured that was probably going to be the bulk of this group, that you've been on them before, but they asked you to come on. So you weren't expressly going out and pitching, and that is very, very common. Hey, Spencer. All right, so also a C there. Awesome. So from that, we're going to move forward. And one thing I want to say is when I do this training, I like it to be very interactive. So do feel free to unmute and ask questions, or you can type them in the chat. I know, again, some of you aren't that familiar with me, but I'm a big chatter, so I'm always happy to answer questions. Always happy to brainstorm on stuff. And since we only have 90 minutes today, there won't be probably as much interaction as there might normally be, but please do feel free to ask questions and do all that good stuff as we move along. Okay, so I'm going to start out with a pretty basic thing, and that is, what is a podcast pitch? But I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, because before we jump into the how, we really need to talk about the what and the why. And I want to define what I mean by that term podcast pitching when it comes to today's training. So pitching means you're sending a story idea or a topic to a member of the media for their consideration. And this is really the crux of what I do on behalf of my clients. And by the end of today's training, hopefully you're going to feel confident enough to start pitching yourself as well. And in this particular instance, we're going to be sending the pitch to podcast hosts. And that's all I do. So in my business, this is the only thing that I pitch. I only pitch podcasts, whether that's one-on-one for my clients or whether that's teaching my members how to do it themselves. I just saw there was a few things in the chat, so I want to make sure I'm not missing any questions. Oh, have your own podcast. Or Steph, you had or have? Oh, have. Okay, Tim, well, great. Oh. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had it. I stopped it when I had my accident because my brain was healing. But yeah, I worked on morning radio, so I've done lots of interviews and been on the other end of what this is.
Great.
Like people asking me to be on it and stuff, but I thought it'd still be interesting. So I don't know if I'm the person that will try and pitch myself to them, but I just
maybe I can inspire you by the end to be that person that pitches
to pitch
yourself
myself to other people's
them.
podcasts.
Yeah, exactly.
Or to start my own back up.
Or hey, I'll take either. I will take either. One thing that I think is important to note in what you just said is because you've been on the other end, there's probably stuff I'm going to talk about today that you can really say, yes, I've seen that and that's worked, or I've seen it done this way. I thought that was a really cool way to do it. I'm always looking on how to improve as well. A lot of the things when I talk about like what podcast hosts are looking for, I always love to know like from people that have had their own shows, if that resonates with them or if there's anything that they'd add to that as well. So cool.
I'll tell you right off the bat, the number one thing that's like, for me, the number one no is like, so many people would either come on radio or on my podcast and lead with, I think I'd be really good on radio. I think I'd be really good on a podcast. And then once there's a mic in front of their face, it's like they don't know their name. You know what I mean? So it's like, I feel like without saying that, the expectation for the host or the interviewer or whatever is like, I need to take, like, it's my job. Like if the interview is bad, it's on me. It's not on the guest. Like I have to listen. I have to be able to guide them through the conversation, like facilitate a way to express their thing. But when they lead with, I'm so good at this, it kind of makes me as a host be like, okay, cool. Like maybe I don't have to try so hard. Like they'll be able to just like converse and hang out. Cause I feel like the most success is when people are relatable and other people want to feel like they're just drinking a cup of coffee, having a beer, hanging out with you. But when like people are like on or show up in a different way, it's kind of like, dude, you don't know what you're doing.
So that's great. We're going to get into what podcast hosts want. And I think what you just said is very interesting towards that. We're going to talk about how it is a recorded conversation, essentially, and how that needs to be the vibe that you're having. But what I think is really cool about what you just said, because it's going to kind of reiterate something that I say, which is, it's okay to have been on small podcasts before, but if you've been on podcasts before, you go to pitch another host, they're going to know that you have had that mic in front of your face. They're going to know that you have had that experience before and that you're able to talk. And just like Steph said, that's really, really important because essentially it's just a recorded conversation. So making sure that you've done that before is going to be a big thing for hosts, even if it's on a small show. Even if it's not some huge show, it's not some big deal, but you've done it before, you're able to say, hey, I've been on some shows before, you can listen to them if you want to hear how I am, but this is something that I've done.
Quick question for you, Christina, regarding that. So similar situation, I had a podcast, I put it on hold, my studio had kind of shut down, but loved what the platform represented just to be in conversation with the community and kind of identify leaders. But does it look bad when you put it on hold and then start maybe pitching yourself to a potential, media consideration for a podcast? Will they
Absolutely not. Okay. Absolutely not. Okay. Yeah. I mean,
There's
part of
that
being
why it's not working, right? But I want to get it going. But...
Well, it's a lot of work. As we all know, I'm actually starting my own podcast this fall, and I hired someone to, basically I'm just doing the talking and I have someone else doing all the rest because it is a lot of work to have your own podcast and to edit and to be putting out and doing all that stuff. So I totally get that. But one thing I want to be clear on is most of my one-on-one clients don't have their own podcasts. So you definitely don't need to have your own podcast to be doing this work. And I'm glad that you brought that up because that's something important that people sometimes get in their mind that they need to have their own in order to be pitching themselves. And it's great if you do, because then you can offer swaps and things like that, but it's absolutely not necessary. So, I think, Tim, that one way you could always address that if it's brought up, which I don't even know if it would be, but if it's brought, in regards to saying, well, why is your podcast on hold? Is you could always just be like, yeah, we took a break, for a while, hoping to restart it up soon. Every podcast host on earth is going to understand that because they know it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. And that's why I sourced a great studio here that did it all.
Good.
I just identified the talent. They did it, produced it, post-production, the content we created off was excellent. But in the new year, they kind of their model kind of took a big pivot.
Shifted.
And, I wanted to keep that level of like expertise or, from a branding standpoint high.
Yeah.
And when they went down, I wasn't going to transfer back and doing it from my computer and not have that quality be at that professional level. So eventually I'll get it back, but I was just curious if it looks bad that you started one and it failed. Okay.
No, absolutely not.
Christina, I don't think that, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Kevin. I'm in a car. That's why I'm kind of out. But and I kind of what he just expressed. I actually host podcasts for one of my clients. They do all the editing. I'm the host, and but I've never done one to pitch my stuff. So would that still be something that you know, I could go forward and start pitching to other podcasts to be on the mic? And you know, I agree with what was said. If you haven't been in front of a mic before, the first time you get one in your face, sometimes it's a little daunting. But you know, is it telling your story? Is that what primarily it is for yourself?
Kevin, did you just like give an intro to my next slide? You did. Good work. All right. So we're going to go into,
I was paying attention.
We're going to go into the next slide, which is all about why we should be pitching ourselves to podcasts. So thank you, Kevin. It's like, I mean, guys, I just paid him beforehand. It's not a big deal. He just swooped in with that, right as we're going to do this. Because I do think it's important to talk about why, even if you have your own podcast, even if you already have a business, all that good type of stuff, this is how you get in front of new people. You know, especially with the changes in the Facebook algorithm, all that good stuff. This is how you get in front of new people and the right people. I don't have a slide on here today, but kind of what I break down sometimes is what marketing should look like. And that falls into 3 categories: earned, owned, and paid. So owned is the stuff that you own, your social media, your website, etc. Paid is stuff you pay for. Typically that's ads, like Facebook ads. Sometimes it can be influencer campaigns, that type of thing. But what I focus on is the earned. And earned media is publicity. And that is different than the owned and the paid, but they all can work together. So like you guys that have your own podcast, that's an owned media. That's your owned marketing that you have going on. Earned is where you're getting on other people's, you're getting in front of other people's audience. No money is exchanged. That's a question that I get asked a lot. We do not ever pay for our guests to be on a show. To us, that is just a huge no-no. If someone comes back to us and says that, which happens every once in a while, they'll be like, yeah, we can get your guest on for $1,000 or whatever. I'm like, no, because that's not what we're doing. Earned media is something completely different. It is where you're able to get in front of another audience, get in front of who they speak to. And that value is huge to the people that are listening, huge to the people that are listening. As long as it's your ideal customer, which we're going to talk about that, but as long as it's the right people that you want to be getting in front of, it really doesn't matter how big that audience is. If it's 100 people, but they're your ideal customer, I would rather have 100 people listening to me in their ear than 1,000 people that aren't that interested in what I have to say. And I also think when people talk about, oh, you know, sometimes I'll talk to people or clients or whatever, and I'll be like, well, they said that they get about 100 downloads, which, by the way, we don't know how many downloads a show gets before we pitch it. That's not public information. But they tell us like, oh, we get about 100 downloads, da, 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 da. All people say, I think that's a waste of my time. I don't think I should spend that hour of my time to do that. And I'm here to say to you that that is absolutely the wrong attitude to have towards it if it's the right audience. If someone called me up and said, Christina, I can get you in front of 100 of your ideal customers at this event that we have coming up, you know, over here in this state, whatever, you better believe I'd be booking that flight, booking my hotel room, getting there as quickly as I possibly can, because that's 100 people that are going to get to hear my story, which is, Kevin, kind of what you asked, what brought me to where I am today. That know, like, and trust factor is going to be upped dramatically. The amount of people that I have after I'm on a podcast that reach out to me in the DMs or shoot me an email, that's where the magic really happens, when people connect with you on a certain level. So being on podcasts is great. It works for all types of online entrepreneurs. I truly 100% believe this. I have clients that do, I mean, most of mine are in the entrepreneur speaking author world, but I also have some that are special needs advocates, some that run nonprofits. There are different kinds of entrepreneurs that see the value in getting in front of new audiences that they can through podcasts. And it's only going to continue to grow. Currently, 55% of the US population has listened to a podcast. That's of 2020. So I'm sure it's even higher now. And 24%, 68 million of the US listen to them weekly. So the opportunities are just coming all the time. And this is true in my house. It probably is for most of you guys. I have ones that I listen to every week. My husband has one he listens to every week. We have ones we listen to together. Those are typically murder-based ones. But you know, we all have our different shows that we like to listen to, and that's only growing. You can tell your story and include a call to action. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the call to action, like with a guest post, is something that makes podcasting really extra special. And we'll talk about that a little bit. And the other thing is, because you can, the barrier to entry is low. You don't have to pay anything. And after this, you're going to hopefully have a good idea of how to actually pitch yourself. So this is absolutely something you can do. And I'm going to talk about how today. Okay. So we did that what, why. Now let's get into the how. Excuse me. Okay, so if you guys have your worksheet, grab that or have it open on your computer, because we're going to start filling in some of that. The first thing that I ask any client before I start getting them booked on podcasts is, who is your ideal customer? Who is that ideal customer avatar? You'll hear me say that a lot today, ICA, because this is going to dictate all the strategy that we work on today. So in your workbook, you'll see that you have a spot to put a line or two. Who is that ideal person that you're trying to get in front of? And I know you guys know this. You don't have to, I'm not trying to have you figure out your ideal customer avatar or anything like that. Just want you to write down really quickly, who is that ideal person that I want to get in front of? So for me, my ICA is an online entrepreneur with an established product who's looking to become a go-to expert in their industry. They want more visibility to attract more people to their lists and products. So that's my ICA. So I'm going to give you all a minute to write that down while I sip on some water. Okay, so now we want to talk about what your call to action is. So what is going to actually convert a listener to become a member of your list or to reach out to you, schedule a call? I mean, best of all, just buy something from you right off the bat. You know, we've already determined that the whole point of doing any sort of publicity is to drive your ideal customer to you and up your profits. So how are you going to get them there? Maybe you have a free download, you have a free Facebook group, perhaps you do a 30-minute consultation. What is it that's you're going to be able to direct people exactly to? Where are you sending them? You want to make sure this is clear, and you want to have one clear call to action for any podcast interview that you do. Don't be sending them to multiple places. You want to have one place that you're sending people. And this is one thing that I always like to point out that I highly recommend, especially when you're starting out with podcasts, is that you direct to an evergreen page. So what I mean by that is something that isn't specific to a launch that you only do a couple times a year, or maybe an event that you have coming up. I like to have my URL be something that's static. So publicitybychristina.com/booked, and then I can change the content underneath that as needed. So I can always have a free download or something like that, which, you know, right now I think we have a guest checklist. So seeing if you're ready to be a podcast guest. But we also can mention webinars, we can mention other things. And then I also have ways that people can work with me. So there's a couple free things that they can do. And then I have some paid things that they can learn more about or sign up for a call or that type of thing. But I find this makes it so much easier to keep track of things. And then I can update it as wanted or needed. I don't have to stress that the URL is different. Someone's going to have the wrong thing, anything like that. It's all just going to this one place. No matter what, the call to action is what makes podcasting so special. As opposed to more traditional forms of media coverage, like a mention in a magazine or even a TV segment, you really have the opportunity to drive people to your list. Now, do those things build up your credibility? Absolutely. But do they grow your list? Not really. Okay. And I've been in the PR game for over 15 years. I've done magazine, TV, podcast, written, all that good stuff. But the thing to me, and why I've really specialized in podcasting, is it is what will drive people to you. You can get on a magazine or get in a magazine. You can get on a TV. They don't have the opportunity to know any more about you. Get quoted in a magazine. Again, that's great credibility, but it's not driving anyone to your list. Okay. So that is what makes podcast guesting so special. Okay. So I'm going to give you another second while I have some more water and write down what that call to action is going to be for you. The other thing I want to say while you guys write that down is that this is the biggest mistake I'll see people make when they guest on podcasts is they don't have a clear call to action. So someone goes on a podcast and they're like, oh, I was on some podcast, or I was on a podcast, but nothing came from it, nothing, blah, 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 blah. A lot of times I'll ask them, oh, okay, well, what did you direct people to? Oh, nothing. Okay, well, there has to be some strategy behind you being a guest. There has to be a place that you're going to direct people to. So think about that. Water. Okay, perfect. So we kind of already talked about this a little bit just earlier when people were asking questions, but we dove into what you want out of this podcast. You want to drive your ideal customer to a clear call to action so they join your list, or even better, pay you money right off the bat. But let's take a minute to discuss what podcast hosts want out of their guests. So again, anyone that has a podcast, I know Tim, Steph, stuff like that, feel free to unmute if you want to add in here. But these are the biggest things that I hear from podcast hosts that they're looking for. Number one, relevant topics to their audience. This is the biggest thing that I hear from people. They actually want a solution to a problem that their audience has, and actionable content that their audience can use. They also want to have a knowledgeable expert that they can have an actual conversation with. And Steph kind of touched on this, okay? We want to make sure that, you remember at the end of the day that this is a recorded conversation. There needs to be rapport there. You need to feel comfortable on the mic. In your first few interviews, you won't feel that comfortable on the mic. That's why I recommend starting small for sure, for your first few. But after you get the first few out of the way, you're going to feel way more confident. You're going to feel like, okay, now I know kind of how I want to talk throughout this, what I'm going to share, all that good stuff. And then finally, you want someone who's going to share the podcast with the host wants someone that's going to share the podcast with their audience as well. And that doesn't mean you need to have 10,000 followers or you need to have, this huge following or anything like that. They just want to make sure that when it does air, you're sharing it on your social and tagging them. You're putting it in your e-newsletter and letting people know that you are on this show. They want to get in front of new people as well, right? That's a part of the reason why podcast hosts do this. They're trying to get in front of new audiences too. So don't be that guest that doesn't share once the podcast is launched. That's something that I hear from hosts all the time as a huge pet peeve for them, is when they do this, they have the guest on, they share it with their audience, and then it's crickets from the guest. Okay. So one thing to just keep in mind. Tim, Steph, anyone else or Kevin that has had a podcast, anything you would add to here that you haven't already said?
I would just agree with you. I think where one area I struggled was getting my guests to repost. I think the experience they really appreciated, they enjoyed. My strategy, is titled Change Agent, was to identify kind of leaders in our community that were doing things outside the norm within their space to kind of, elevate our city. And they really appreciate that opportunity. And then I would create, still images and small 30-second snippets of them talking to add value to. And none of them would rarely post.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it maybe had to do with them not being very social media active or have really profiles that they really spent all the time with. But I did notice once they left kind of the table, they got back to their busy lives. And I didn't want to be that person tracking them down and be like, do you want to reshare everything we talked about? So I can relate to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Christina, how specific does the call to action, how specific should it be? Because part of the question that I'm asking is, it's not like you're selling something. It's not like you're saying, here, buy this widget. Right?
Yes,
so
correct.
It's not like you're saying, go to this link and buy the widget off the website. It's if it's part of a broader story or a broader personal branding, campaign where you're looking at some social media outlets, or how specific should it be? How should I be thinking about the call to action?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it doesn't need to be super specific, but it should relate to what it is that you are selling. So like if it is something, I don't know, for instance, like if it was a social media widget or something like that, maybe it's something like, you know, a web, I don't know, even know, like it can be as simple as like a downloadable checklist or something really simple like that. You know, I don't know can you tell me what the item is? Sorry, if you can briefly.
No,
and I could
there
okay.
isn't the thing is there isn't an item, right? You know,
oh, sure. Okay.
If I were to do this, it would be to elevate my profile within a certain community, right? So that'd be
I
the
think
reason.
I think it could be as simple in that case as directing people to follow you on LinkedIn or, you know, something like that too. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, where someone's giving you their email address in exchange for something. Whatever is the most benefit to you. Like if people are going to start connecting with you on LinkedIn or following you on LinkedIn, and that for you personally is great, then that's fine. I would just make sure that it's very clear that you have one way for them to get a hold of you and to find you.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna look in the chat. Yes, that was a great question. Plus, Sasha, and haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you. Okay, so let's move on. And again, if any questions pop up, then please feel free to unmute or put in the chat. Okay, so now we're going to think about what are some topic ideas that tie back our ICA to our CTA. It's acronym o'clock, y'all. That ideal customer to our call to action. Now that everyone's cards are on the table, let's move forward coming up with some great topic ideas. You want to pique the hosts and listeners' interest enough that it seems like a no-brainer for them to go over and either grab your freebie, connect with you on a social channel. Amy Porterfield calls this the invisible bridge. So essentially you're taking them from where they are now to where you want them to be. So I want you to start writing ideas down if something pops into your head as we go through this. And I want you to get specific with your topics, no broad generalizations, okay? So there's a big difference between a general topic like branding and a specific topic like top 3 ways to get your brand dialed in to double your revenue in 2021, okay? We wanna get as specific as we possibly can. Now, there are 2 types of pitches that I work on, instructive and connection. And I'm going to dive into connections in a moment, but I like to have at least one of each when I pitch, unless I know that a host only really does one kind. This certainly doesn't have to be exact, but this should get your wheels turning. And I also don't want you to worry about the where yet. We're going to get into that shortly. We're just focusing now on the topics that make sense for you. So I want you to start thinking about some instructive podcast topics. So how to blank. The X ways to, 5 mistakes, 3 reasons why, I want you to start thinking about the instructive podcast topics, and I'm going to get into an example. So example 1, what you do, you're a budgeting coach. Your ideal customer is a parent who has trouble budgeting for family trips. Your call to action is a free checklist for ways that families can cut down on expenses. Topic idea, how to easily save $6,000 a year for a dream vacation without ever having to see the money in your account. That's great to have that last part. You don't necessarily need to. The how to easily save $6,000 a year for a dream vacation. So what we're doing is it's a perfect combo of who that ICA is, a parent who has trouble budgeting for family trips, that's going to take them to that call to action. Because you're going to be talking about the ways that they can easily save, okay? Then you're going to say at the end of that, hey, by the way, I got a free checklist on my website of ways that families can cut down on expenses. And they're going to say, oh, that's awesome. I really liked what this person had to say. Now I'm going to go ahead to their website and download that checklist, okay? So that's an example of kind of how we pair these 2 together when it comes to the instructive item. All right, let me give you guys a minute if you want to think about that. Also, feel free to drop them in the chat or even unmute. I'm always happy to brainstorm. Brainstorming's one of my number 1 things that I enjoy doing. So let me know if you have any ideas that you want to talk through on that. Okay, I realized I gave you like 1 minute, but then I remembered that we only had 90 minutes. So I want to make sure that I get into this other stuff. All right, so now we're going to talk about the connection podcast topics. And I'm seeing this happen more and more and more, where this is becoming what a lot of podcast hosts are starting to lean towards, okay? So this is where you're really going to go deep on you. right? You, the guest. What makes you different and unique? What is relatable? What are people going to remember? What are you super passionate about? Side note, make sure that you feel comfortable talking about this publicly because remember, this is a recorded conversation. It's going to go out in front of other people. So make sure that this is stuff that you're okay talking about, but it is becoming much more common to really go deep on, you know, different podcast topics. So here are some examples. These are ones that I've actually pitched on behalf of clients that have led into amazing interviews. So the only one in the room, real talk from the C-suite as a BIPOC and LGBTQIA business professional. How having a chronic illness has led to creating a business that works. When the odds are stacked, how to serve an audience that doesn't look or sound like you. Okay. So these are examples of people getting really into the things at their life that have impacted them. And that is what people relate to so much. Okay. And this is, again, what I'm seeing more and more hosts kind of lean towards are these types of topics as opposed to just the instructive how-to. Now, that doesn't mean that the how-tos don't happen. They absolutely still do, but I'm starting to see more and more of the connection-based topics come in. So again, I'm going to give you another minute here. Feel free to think about it. If you want to, you can always unmute or you can share in the chat, either type, the instructive or the connection, or you can always just message me afterwards. You can shoot me a DM or shoot me an email, say, you know, here's something I was thinking about. What do you think? And the reason why topics are so important to think about is you have to do that work. Okay. 9 times out of 10, a host takes a topic that we give them. All right. In fact, I'd say 9.9 times out of 10, the host gives a topic. And I think this is where a lot of people make mistakes because they just say, oh, well, I'm an expert in this, this, and this. What would you like to have me talk about? And they think that that's easier for the host. It's not. Okay, it's easier to give them specific topics that they can say, yes, I like this one. This is the one that I want to talk about. Or I like this one. Can we tweak it a little bit and maybe talk a little bit more on XYZ? You need to do the heavy lifting for a host to say yes. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you a minute.
Christina, I think I missed something. I got a bit about examples of the instructive, but what was the connection? Or you haven't talked about the connection type of topic?
Well, these are the examples for the connection.
Okay, so okay, got it.
Cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, I wrote them out a little differently than the others. You know, as you'll see, there's not going to be as much of like that direct link between your, you know, call to action and stuff like that. At this point, you're getting in front of people that you know are your ideal customer and they're going to relate to your story. They want to hear your story. And at the end of every interview, the host is going to give you the opportunity to share where people can find out more about you or reach out to you, et cetera. This one at the top, the only one in the room, that has been one that one of my clients has done on a couple shows, or has talked about on a couple shows. And he gets crazy engagement from people in his DMs, sending him emails, et cetera, when he talks about that topic. And so that's the perfect opportunity for you to be able to engage with people and engage with people authentically. And whether that means they end up joining your list or becoming a client is great. But either way, you know, they're going to remember you and remember that conversation that you had. Okay. Anyone brave enough to share any topic ideas? Connection or how to instructive?
I've got one.
Yes.
One of the themes that comes up regularly when we have these conversations is that it's, as Ravi likes to say, lonely at the top, or leading is lonesome. I got that right, Ravi, sorry. But basically, it's not safe to ask for help.
I think we actually pitched that for you as a topic idea, which was a great topic idea, which is leadership is lonely, how to feel safe, right, at the top. You know, because, you know, and I know you guys have spoken about this before, but, you know, you don't know who you can trust, who you can really talk to within your organization, for sure. I think that's a great topic.
This might be too broad, but I'm curious to get your feedback. It'd be on the connection side. It'd be finding purpose in the unfamiliar, turning local real estate transactions into immediate transformation.
What do you mean by that? What is that?
So it'd be actually, instead of transformation, local impact. So I elevate real estate from being transactional into transformational by partnering and bringing the community together to rally around nonprofits, and the vehicle is real estate.
Okay. I would definitely put that in the rest of the, like, if you have the top line is what you kind of said, and then and you'll see an example of this, but you'd give a line or two after. I would be clear about like kind of what that means, like the impact means, like you said, the nonprofit or that type of thing. I think that's a really, really cool topic. And there are so many real estate podcasts out there that you could definitely be getting in front of. Whenever I get new clients that I think could potentially like be in front of real estate, I'm always like, how do you feel about being in front of real estate? Because there's so many like out there. It's awesome.
I never
so many good ones.
And I never wanted to be in the space. That's why I kind of like it. But I've found so much purpose in it once I kind of separated myself from the title. And it's incredible what the industry's been able to give back once I
I love what you just said. Like going beyond the title of real estate agent or what, like something like that, like how to make an impact in your community, with selling or whatever, something like that. But I think that is a really, really cool topic to me. Like I didn't necessarily want to be pigeonholed in this real estate thing or whatever, but this has been an opportunity for me to then have a real impact on my community. I think that is a really, really cool topic.
Tim, the other thing you said that resonated with me was just the connection side, right? We talked, the connection is the deeper dive of what matters to you. Yeah. And even just what you said, hey, I didn't start in this direction, but I ended here. And putting the right words to that is really compelling too, in a punchy way. Like
totally.
And that's kind of what the theme to my Changing podcast was, is we all look for, the best path to success. But once you start hearing the stories of people in our community and how they got to where they are, it's never a straight line, right? It's the struggles, the trials and tribulations they go through that we can, either relate to and find connection with.
Absolutely.
So I like how what you just said, Robbie.
and make it, from a Mad Men kind of point of view, think of, it can be whatever that is. Like I gave up a professional career in golf for this, whatever that hook is, whatever that is. You have those kind of compelling stories and it really drives you today.
Absolutely.
And being the greater than the sum of parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was a real estate agent, but I'm changing lives.
Oh, I like that.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I like that one too.
Right.
That one's really good.
That's not self-serving at all, is it?
Isn't that the idea?
You know what, Tim?
We're allowed to here.
Absolutely.
You got to be a little self-serving in a podcast pitch. I mean, come on. That's how it's going to be. That's how it's going to be.
People's lives. Come on, people.
Exactly. Come on, folks. Listen to me. And I think what you just said about the not being a straight line, that is what people really connect with. Like for me, for instance, like the reason I'm doing what I do now is because I left the agency world when I had my daughter, because I was like, I can't be a senior account exec anymore. Like I can't be working these hours and all this stuff, and launched my first course and did no publicity for it because everyone said do paid and owned. And it was a complete disaster. And so then the next time I launched my course, I was like, all right, I'm doing this my way. And I started guesting on podcasts and it was night and day, and so that's what led me to realize like, okay, this is something that entrepreneurs aren't really taught. We're not taught to do these other things because there's not a distinct ROI like you might see with ads, right? Or something like that. So anyways, people they connect with me so much on that. Like I hear from people a lot because I tell that story of like my failure and what happened there and how that led me to today.
Can I add something?
Yes.
I think like what I'm hearing in all this too, and like how like Tim, you started, and then how Perry in the chat was like, make it simpler. I think that sometimes, and again, like I did morning radio and my podcast it wasn't like a very specific thing, but in the same sense, it's like, I feel like people think when they're on air or on a podcast, they need to be the smartest person in the room. And that's not correct. They need to be the most relatable person in the room. Mm-hmm. So I feel like sometimes people will be like super wordy, and like you want anyone that maybe just tuned in for the first time to understand what you're talking about and relate to it, or else if you talk over their head and they feel dumb, they're kind of, and again, specific podcasts, like maybe like I don't understand some of the real estate stuff, so like maybe, you know, whatever, but like in general, I feel like when people try and be really smart, they lose the relatability and the conversation. Like there's a way to kind of like balance both, which I think is important.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah.
There's also a way too at the beginning. I think what Steph said is important. I always set the stage for what publicity is on any podcast I go on. And I think that there's an opportunity there as well, Tim, to say like, this is how real estate transactions, just briefly, when you're not on a real estate show, this is how they generally work, you know, this or that. And that gives people a good, just like how in the Olympics, I think a normal person should be picked out of the crowd to do whatever it is next to their real professional athletes, just so we can be like, oh, wow, like that is really amazing, like what they do. Like we need to kind of know like, okay, what is the baseline for this? Like what are like most people, you know, rolling with, and then see how it is that you're doing it differently.
Christina, one of the things that, you know, and I agree with Steph, in hosting a podcast, obviously much different than what we're talking about here. But one of the things that I really appreciate when I host one is someone who comes on who has just fantastic stories, you know, that can really communicate and tell stories, you know, about the things that they've done and how it goes. And so I try to prompt them to get those stories out of them, you know, keep asking and diving into questions. So in the reverse role, I would probably want to really get into some of those stories and sharing experiences and stories that would lead back to what we're talking about, to that topic.
Yes, absolutely. And you make a great point. Stories are that's what people remember. That's why that example of the only one in the room, the one I have at the top there, he tells stories about what happened to him, you know, being in the C-suite in Silicon Valley, what led him to go off on his own, things like that. That is absolutely what people relate to, what people like to hear. And that's where they really start the engagement. So stories and all that type of stuff is very important.
Yeah. And I think too, it's because in however long this podcast you're not going to educate these people to the extent you want. So like, but it's, if the connection is there, the people will then go seek you out to find what you want to teach them. Like in that amount of time, no one's going to absorb, you know, whether it's a half an hour podcast or whatever, no one's going to absorb all the knowledge you want to drop on them. But if they relate to you and like you, then they're going to go do the research to get what you're trying to give. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like a lot of people miss that step one, like you guys are saying. Like, it's like the connection is like, all you're trying to do is make a friend on a podcast, really. You know what I mean? So that then they'll be interested in what you're doing and go get more information or contact you.
Yep. And that's why I want to have that call to action be super clear. We want to be very clear on what that call to action is. So when they say, I do want to know more about Steph, I do want to know more about Kevin, they know exactly where to go to get more information from you. 100%. Okay, cool. Great. You guys, awesome. I love this. I love the discussion. Okay, so now we've got an idea on topics. Let's talk about how to find the podcasts that fit with your topics. Okay, the match game. I already talked about this, but starting small is a good thing. You know, we all want to be featured on Jenna Kutcher, Pat Flynn's podcast, or whoever the big people are in your niche. But for most of us, that's not where we're going to start out, and that's okay. Starting on smaller podcasts is ideal so that you can build up your chops before pitching the big guns. I already gave you guys the analogies of 100 downloads versus 100 people in an audience, but getting in front of some of these hosts, like even if they have 100 people listening to them, those are 100 people that really love what that host has to say. So when you come on their show, they're like, oh, well, so-and-so brought Christina on, so clearly they must like what she has to say. I better listen in. So starting small is a good thing. Don't get caught up in the numbers. And the other thing to remember is, like I said earlier, we don't know the numbers. Okay. So for any podcast that's out there, we don't know how many downloads it has. We may know that it's in the top 200 of podcasts or something like that, but we don't know what that equates to. So unless a host decides to share, which they don't typically, this isn't information that you're going to have. So that's why I preach focusing on who the audience is. as opposed to how many people are listening. Okay.
Christina,
all right. So
what do you know about your audience?
What do you mean?
Like, what do you know in terms of the profile of your audience? Their backgrounds, where they are, what they do, how old they are, all of that stuff.
Well, I have an ideal customer avatar. So that's something that I highly, if you don't have that, that's something I highly recommend. So essentially I have a one page that's like this, and you could, I'm sure you could look this up online to find what should be included in there. But I actually have like like this is their name, this is their age, this is where they live, these are the things that they're interested in. I actually have a little picture like I took off the internet of someone that fits that description, and I literally have that. And when I'm looking at podcasts, I'm thinking like, okay, well, is this a show that she would listen to? Is this a show that so and so would listen to?
I think
my question is more as a my question is more as a host. Do you know who you are? Do you know the profile of your audience as a host?
Oh, yes, they do. Yeah.
So what do they know about their audience?
I mean, I guess I don't know specifically because I'm not a host. I don't have a show, so I don't know what exactly. Okay, I can help. Steph, go in.
Like, so it depends on where you host yours, but like where I host mine is a place called Simplecast, and then it shoots it out to like Spotify, iTunes, wherever. You can literally see where in the country they listen, what time they listen, how long they listen. A lot of times you can see if they're male or women. You can see their age. Like depending on what analytics you want to buy, they give you all the back end of that. And I mean, I can, you know what I mean? So it's pretty specific. You like, on the other end, you kind of know, and that's not necessarily your target, but that's what you're getting. So you can kind of like work around it that way. But it literally will tell you, like, if your podcast is like 30 minutes long, that like after 6 minutes, this person dropped off, and you can like go back and listen and be like, what did I say then that turned these people off or on or whatever? Like, it's pretty specific, the analytics you can get on the back end of your hosting site. If you have, because I did it all myself. I recorded it, I edited it, I put it up, like I did it all. So some hosts might not have access to that, but they get paid probably on that, but it is available to get pretty specific.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we do ours on, I think, Podbean and Apple or something like that. And I don't do it because I'm not that tech savvy, but I know that they can pull analytics about where people are listening from and different things. We did one with the U.S. National softball team, and we had people listening from Japan, and they were able to pull those analytics out and figure out,
the country stuff is very cool. Most of my clients, I'd say half my clients, are based outside of the US, but we only pitch to North American based podcasts. So it's very interesting because we can usually ask a host afterwards, like, well, for some people, like one of our clients, she's really big in Australia, which is where she lives. So when we were able to say afterwards, like, okay, well, did most of the listeners come from Australia of that particular episode, or were they US based, or kind of what did that look like? So yes, I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your questions, but yes, the host absolutely has the analytics.
Thanks.
A quick question for you. For your clients, are you targeting more video-based podcasts or audio, or does it make
audio? Okay. Audio. Audio.
Something I learned earlier, the value of a podcast is the amount of content you can create from one conversation. So video has a lot of power there. But I guess who you have available to you to, cut it up and edit it obviously goes a long way. But I'm curious, is there much of a difference between audio or video?
No, I really don't see that much of a difference there. And more hosts are recording with the Zoom audio on as well. I think so that they can upload that, onto YouTube or things like that afterwards. And that's totally fine. If they want to do that and edit it, that's great. That's only, to your point, added content, which is awesome. Other than you have to like maybe put makeup on if you're a chick, which is, different than if it's just audio. But, that's absolutely happening more and more. But when we focus on our podcast, we're looking for ones that are specifically in Apple Podcasts audio. But I do believe in chopping everything up as much as you can. Any podcast that I'm on and that our clients are on, I have my VA chop up using into audiograms using Headliner. And then we use those over and over and over again in our social media, in our e-newsletters, etc. So there's absolutely, you should be looking at your podcast interviews as content, no matter what. Okay, so starting to research, these are the 3 ways that I recommend researching your podcasts. Google search, iTunes, Apple Podcast search, we'll talk about that specifically, and then asking your ideal customer. Now, as we go through some of this, you're not really going to have the time to research right now, but I want you to know kind of what that looks like and how you can do it after this, okay? And it's always good if you come across some bigger ones to, of course, set goals of ones that you want to be on. Podcasting kind of happens, I don't know if anyone's ever or has read here Atomic Habits by James Clear, but he talks about like how, ice, it doesn't freeze right until it reaches the 32 degrees Fahrenheit or the 0 Celsius. But all this stuff is happening right beforehand, like these things that we don't see that are happening under the surface until it freezes solid. And that's really how I describe publicity and getting on some bigger shows, is you're going to be on these other little shows that are full of your ideal customer, that are your right audience. And that's going to get you onto these bigger ones that is eventually going to lead to where you kind of have this, this kind of the turning point, the tipping point, if you will. This happened with one of my clients recently. We've gotten him on, he's been working with us for about 6 or 7 months. We've gotten him on these different shows. Then he got on like a pretty good size show, and now he's on a big show. He was actually recording today. So these are the things that's kind of how publicity works. And so it's good to just kind of know where you want to start, write down those longer term goals, but realize there's going to be some other podcasts that are going to happen along the way. Okay, so first and foremost, really low hanging fruit, ask your ideal customer, put it up on a social post, add it to your next newsletter. Hey, what are you guys listening to? What's really interesting to you right now? I guarantee you'll get a show or 2 that you hadn't heard of before. The other thing is to use Google. So this is an example that I have here, but I have the public relations podcast is what I put up here in the Google search bar. I do it in the past year. And that's because I just want to make sure that as much as possible, the podcasts that I'm looking at are current. So I put in the past year, and then you're going to find a lot of roundup articles like this. It's a great place to start your research if you prefer to do it that way. But that is not how I prefer to do it. I prefer to do it on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. This is how I do all research for my clients. Now, the reason I have iTunes or Apple Podcasts is for newer Macs like mine. They only have Apple Podcasts, but on other computers, iTunes is going to be what you're going to use. Okay. With that being said, they're laid out very similarly. So the example that I'm going to show you, if you're using iTunes, is going to look the same generally. Now, before we get started on this, I'm going to warn you that what I'm about to teach you, in particular on the next little video that I'm going to show you, can really take you down a big, big rabbit hole. And I actually have, this is no joke, an analog timer at my desk right here that when I start this work, I set, and that is the amount of time I have to do the research for my clients, because I will go down a huge rabbit hole and I can't have it be on my phone because then I get distracted by other things. So anyways, just know that you may have to give yourself some time limits for the work that I'm going to show you, because you'll definitely be like, wait, what? So first I'm going to show you how to just do general searching on iTunes. So this is the homepage. When you check in or when you get in there, you can go down into the categories section, hit see all kind of different categories there. Most people here, we're going to be in business, health and fitness, sports, any of those you can go into. We are going to go into, let's see, what did I choose when I made this example? We're going to go into health and fitness. You can have the top shows here, which may not be what we're looking at right now because they're going to be big shows. I don't usually go into the new shows, but you can start to look at some of the subcategories they have: alternative health, fitness, nutrition, sexuality, mental health. You can start to do your research in there. But the thing that you're going to do next is you're going to go into the top shows. Let's say you're going to hit see all. You can go into one of these if one of these looks in particular interest to you. So let's say I'm like, okay, this Skinny Confidential, him and her, looks like it could be good. I can go in here, take a look at their episodes. It's in the health and fitness category. If their episodes look great, that could be one that I could write down to pitch later on. But what you're going to see if you scroll down to the end is this: you might also like. And this is where the rabbit hole happens. You can go in, you can look at a bunch of different shows that are going to have a similar audience to what that his and her one had. You know, and you can go in there, you can start to look around and just, you know, see what looks interesting. Now, let's say I wanted to head into alternative health. I just hit the see all. I'm going to do the same thing again. So I can go through these podcasts. If there's one that kind of reaches out to me, or I just want to reach out to the first one I see, whatever. This well-fed women, I can go in there. Again, take a look at this podcast, see if it makes sense. But also, again, I'm going to head down to that you might also liked, okay? And then I'm going to hit see all, and it just keeps going and going and going. And I can look into these shows. I can see if some of these seem like they might be a good fit for my audience. I love Paleo MG. I was actually really excited when I did this video because I didn't know that she had a podcast. So that was exciting for me to start downloading. But you can start looking and seeing what makes sense. You can also go into the search bar. Let's say you do vegan, you know, you work with, you're a vegan foods coach. You can put vegan in and you can see what shows come up for that. Okay, so they have a bunch of different shows that focus on vegan living. So you could go in, do the exact same thing. Look at these shows, hit on one, see what comes up in the you might also like, okay? So as you can see, these are kind of the top vegan shows that they have listed. But I could go into one, let's say I go into this ordinary vegan, see if this makes sense for me, if it's the right fit. But I continue to go down and again, go into that you might also like and find even more shows that are focused on vegan. Some are going to be the same as we're on that original page. Some are going to be different. Okay. But that is how I do general research on iTunes. Okay. Any questions on that? And you can see how the rabbit hole happens.
It's really smart. It's a really smart way to do that initial research.
Well, if you think that, just wait for my podcast piggyback strategy. And I'll show another video of how I specifically do this strategically. But Tim, did you have a question before I jump into this? Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. I thought you were putting your hand up. Okay. So you can always do the general search on iTunes, plug in a keyword or two, do all that good stuff. But this is how I kind of keep it in order. All right. Is I use my podcast piggyback strategy, and you'll find spaces for this in your workbook. Okay. All right, so this is what I do. So essentially what I do, how to kick it off, is I think about someone that would have a similar ideal customer to me. So someone that would have a similar ideal customer avatar for me. Let's say I'm a parenting expert, which hot tip, I am not, but Heather Chauvin is. And so I put her in the search bar. I have her up here. I put her in and I see the different shows that she's been on. Okay, she's been on a bunch of different shows. And so I'm going to click the see all so that I can see the places that she's been. Now, of note, if it's someone that has a very common name, you might need to make sure that it's the right person that has been on these shows. But for Heather, I know that it's her that's been on all these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find one that she's been on that I think looks interesting. And I'm going to write Heather's name down in the first row of that column of the podcast piggyback strategy. I hopped into the Not Your Mother's podcast. I look at the episodes. That looks like it could be a good one. So I'm going to put that in there in the second column of the podcast piggyback strategy. And one thing I always like to point out here is that it's okay if a competitor has been on a show that you're interested in. And in fact, I think that's a good thing because it means the host is interested. So all you need to do is figure out how to pitch them on something different, something than what that person also spoke about. I'm finding this a lot happening right now for me personally. A lot of people have had podcast experts on to talk about why podcast guesting is important. So what I'm doing now is going on and talking about how to be a good guest, how to amplify once your podcast comes out, stuff like that. Instead of just saying, hey, here are the reasons why you should be a podcast guest. It's much more informational. It's like the 201 version. All right, so then I'm going to head into that you might also like, okay? So I've gone to a show that Heather's been on. Now I want to see some shows that are similar. I'm going to go into the see all, and I'm going to click into a couple of these, see if they're a good fit. If they look like they're a good fit, I'm going to write them in the third column of that podcast piggyback strategy, okay? So I'm going to write down the mamahood. That looks like it could be a good one for me. Heather hasn't been on it. Then I can go into some other ones too, like I think the one that I go in here, the Happy as a Mother podcast, see if that makes sense for me. I'm going to look in, and if it does look like it's a good fit, that's going to go again in that same last column on the podcast piggyback strategy. And I'm just kind of going to go from there. So at the end, this is what my podcast piggyback strategy is going to look like. Okay, that's what the columns are going to look like. I have the guest, who's that similar ICA to me, Heather Chauvin, the podcast that she has been on, the Not Your Mother's podcast, and then some similar ones. I just have 2 spaces, but you can write down as many as you want. By the end of doing this exercise, you're going to have a whole bunch of new shows that you wouldn't have reached out to before or would have really known about before. This is why I have to set that timer, because this is where you can really start to get into it. But I find that this helps me organize the shows that I want to reach out to a lot easier. Any questions on this? No? Okay, cool. Then I want you to choose one. So I know you guys don't have the time to do the research right now, but when it comes time to start writing your first pitch, you need to just choose one show to focus on and move from there. Okay, I don't want you worrying about writing for 12 different podcasts or anything like that. Just choose one, and that's where you're going to do your first pitch. All right, let's do it. I know we're cutting close on time, so I'm trying to get in here as much as possible. Okay, so how do you quickly establish yourself as an expert? First things first, you got to make sure that you establish yourself as an expert or an authority in your pitch. Some podcast hosts may receive multiple pitches a day or even a week. And according to most of my buddies that host podcasts, most of the pitches are pretty terrible. So I want to make sure that you guys are set up for success so that you can be sending out pitches that are going to get you noticed by hosts. And one way to do that is highlighting your credibility markers. Everyone has credibility markers. I don't want you getting stressed out if you feel like you can't think of any credibility markers off the top of your head. You don't need to have been in business for 10 years, won all sorts of awards, hit the TEDx stage, anything like that to be credible. There's a lot of different ways that you can be credible. And in your workbook, we don't have time to run through them today, but there are some prompts that you can fill in later. People that have had podcasts or hosted podcasts, that's of course a great credibility marker. If you've had, for me, I've had hundreds of people go through my course, things like that. So that's a great credibility marker. That's stuff that I can put in there that lets people know, oh, okay, she knows what she's talking about. And again, it doesn't have to be anything huge, but just stuff that shows that you're an expert in what it is that you teach. Okay, so now that we've gone through that, we should have just about all the individual pieces of the pitch to start putting together. All right. So you have this in your workbook, you have this template to use, and then you also have a swipe file in your workbook as well, because if you're like me, you like to see an example of an actual pitch, because I'm a visual learner like that. But here is the template for when you send your pitch. Now, first and foremost, find out the name of the host. I know that that may seem very, like people are like, yeah, obviously I would find the name of the host. You won't believe how many people do not do that work. They just write hi or hi host or things like that. And the thing that drives me bonkers about this in particular is the podcast host name is in Apple. It's in Apple Podcasts or iTunes. It's right under the name of the show. So find out the name of the media contact and write it in there. Then I want you to create a connection. For example, if you've met them before, that's always great, but that doesn't have to be it. Most of the time you're going to be sending a cold pitch. So I really enjoyed your recent episode on XYZ, and tell them a reason why you liked it. Make sure they know that you actually spent the time to look at their show. And if you have the chance to listen to it, even better. You'll be able to put something even better in there. Then you're going to introduce yourself using a couple credibility markers and why you bring value to their audience. Why you bring value to their audience, okay? Not why they should have you on their show, why you bring value to their audience, okay? Because that is what the podcast hosts want. If you remember from our slide, that is the number one thing. They want people to bring actionable content and value to their listeners. So what is it about you and using your credibility markers that's going to bring that value there? So I just have a quick example here. For me, I'm an online publicity strategist with over 15 years experience who's been featured on XYZ. The reason for me that I've been featured on XYZ is because that's what I do. I work in the publicity realm. So by being able to say that I've been on these shows or I've had clients booked in, major publications or things like that, that gives credibility there. But for you, it might be something different. Then I say something like, here's some topics that I think would benefit your audience. because again, it's all about their audience. And then 1 to 3 descriptive bullet points. And again, you have the example, and I'll show you the example of what this looks like. I always offer to send more ideas or to tweak based on their feedback. And then I sign off with my web and social links. And and you actually link to them, have that be in your signature or have it be just under where you sign off, because the first thing that a host is going to do is they're going to want to go check out your website. They want to go check out your website. They want to go check out your social links. They want to go make sure that you're legit and that it's someone that they'll want on their show. So here's a real life example of a successful pitch that I sent for myself. This is something I wrote for the Growth Lab podcast, which if any of you are familiar with Growth Lab, it's their podcast. And it's also included in the workbook. Now, don't get stressed out on the subject line. I typically just put one of the proposed topic ideas. So just use one of those and put it as the subject line, okay? So, hey, Sean, that's his name. I loved your recent podcast about ConvertKit's attempted name change in 2018. I also live in Boise, which is where ConvertKit is based. So I was able to make that connection there with him. I'm a publicity specialist, blah, 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 some information on me. And then I go into, as you know, the rise in online entrepreneurship has exploded with COVID-19. I should have started the video earlier. Sorry, guys. There we go. And so then I'm going to give my couple of topic ideas here. And I'm going to give a couple lines after that just explain it a little bit more. So like when Tim was talking about his idea, I said, make sure you put in that line or two after, explain it a little bit more. You don't have to get into a big, long explanation, but I typically like to put 1 or 2 sentences after the proposed topic idea, just to expand a little bit more on what it is that I'm going to talk about. Then I'm always happy to provide them with more information or ideas based on their feedback. Thanks so much for your consideration. My name, and then a link to my website and the social channels that I'm active on so that they're able to go take a look at them. Okay, and that's it. It's not something super long. It's not something super involved. It's just quick to the point, and it's very, very formulaic. Once you create this you essentially have a template lined up that you just need to swap out maybe some different topic ideas, swap out the connection and of course their name and things like that. But once you have a template ready to go, this is how I do all work for my clients. We write a general template for each client, and then we just personalize it based to the host and what if maybe there's different topic ideas that we're going to do there. So you can even just save it in your Gmail as a template, drop it in when you find a podcast that you're interested in, and just update it as needed. All right, any questions on that before I move forward? Good, you got the examples? Okay, awesome. All right, now how to find contact info. Now you know the pitch is well on its way, or at least you know who you're pitching and what about. Let's talk about how to find the right person to send the pitch to. So first and foremost, Google the podcast to see if it has a website. Many do. If they do, look at the website for an email address first. That is always the best way to know that it went through, and it makes follow-up a lot easier or less awkward. If they only have an online form, that's also totally okay. Just write out, what I recommend is writing out your pitch in a Google Doc and then copy and paste it into the form. And the reason for that is you won't get a copy of what you sent the form. And I have had this happen before where someone writes me back and they're like, yes, we'd love to have you on. And then I'm like, shoot, what did I pitch them? Okay, so by putting it in a Google Doc, I know that I can go back and see what it was that I pitched them, when, all that good stuff. Another way is through the Facebook or Instagram about section. I'll show you guys that on the next slide. And then also sending private messages. But when I send a private message, I'm only asking, what is your email address or where do I pitch? Okay, I'm not sending them my pitch. I'm not doing that. But this is how you find emails on Instagram. This has been by far the easiest way for me to do it. Head to the host profile. So this is Tina Tower's profile. Click on the contact button. Not everyone will have this, but most people will. And then voila, it's going to pop up with an email address right there. Okay, so that's a really easy way to find out the email address to be pitching to. Speaking of Instagram, let's also talk about pitching in the DMs. So this is something that me and my team have been doing now for the past multiple months, and it works really, really well. Now, I need to preface this with the fact that you don't need to create this in order to move forward in pitching yourself. I don't want it to be a barrier. But when you, or perhaps a member of your team, have the time to fiddle around in Canva for a little bit, this is an impactful, easy thing to create. So after we send our email pitch, we will shoot a quick note over to the host via Instagram and include a really simple graphic like this. So here's an example, little note, hey, I shot this over yesterday, look forward to hearing back. And then it has that Instagram image in there, okay? So I'm not pitching them, I'm just letting them know that I sent a pitch via email, and then I have this quick image for them to look at. And these are the types of responses we get regularly from hosts when this happens. Sounds like a great fit. Ooh, I can't wait to look at the pitch. Let me find out more. This works really well because a lot of times hosts have other people monitoring their email, but they don't necessarily have other people monitoring their DMs. So a lot of times we actually get in front of the host and we let them know that we sent an email, and then they can go and look for that email, or they can let their assistant know, hey, Christina's pitching me about this lady, Mira Kothan. Can you shoot me that email, right? So that is why pitching in the DMs works really well, and it's something that we're seeing happen more. Okay, so real quick, sorry, I'm trying to race through this really fast. Let's talk about the importance of follow-up. I cannot tell you how many times I booked myself or my client for media because I actually follow up. I would honestly say it's more than half of the times, more than 50% of the times, it's because I follow up. We all miss or flag emails every now and again. Podcast hosts are also human. So 1 or 2 simple, respectful follow-ups a week or 2 later does not bother anyone. What I typically do is re-forward my original email, change the subject line, and add something like this to the top. So I just wanted to follow up on the email I sent last week regarding whatever it is I want to talk about. I think it'd be a great fit because here's how it helps their audience. That's all I send. And typically when we send follow-ups, we send this one 1 to 2 weeks later, and then we actually send a third follow-up 3 weeks after that. And when we send the third follow-up, we send a different story idea too, a different topic idea as well. So that's something to keep in mind, but don't let the follow-up slip, okay? Make a note in your calendar or however you got to do it to remind yourself to do the follow-up, because trust me, this is where a lot of our bookings happen. Okay, so what to expect after yes or maybe. One thing is you might have to have a potential call with the host. This doesn't happen all the time. In fact, it's not very often. But sometimes the host just wants to make sure that you vibe. So they'll want to have a call with you before they do the actual podcast interview or agree to do the podcast interview. So don't be stressed out if that happens. Once you've set an interview date, listen to a few of their podcasts and prep things you think they might ask, as well as what you want to make sure and say about your call to action. Don't be pushy on a release date. I know for a fact that a big pet peeve of podcast hosts is when guests are really pushy about a release date. Now, of course, a host may ask you if you have a preferred release date, meaning the day the podcast will drop to their subscribers, but lots of the time they already have multiple episodes already lined up. Don't be pushy. This work that you should be doing, we call it the sustained spotlight for a reason. It's something you should be doing over time. It's you getting people on your list over time. It's not for just one big launch. And then, like we spoke about at the beginning, amplify once it's released. So share it everywhere, tag the host, add it to the logo bar or media page on your website, and just make sure that you get it out there. What happens if it's crickets? It's all good. Just move on to the next. I certainly don't get me or my clients booked on every podcast I pitch, and you won't either. You're probably looking at like 30 to 40% success rate. If you send a solid pitch and you do your follow-up, there's not much else you can do except take your awesome ideas and shop them elsewhere. You've got tons of other options. Just look at that podcast piggyback sheet if you need inspiration and start pitching again. I just like to say for background, like for most of our clients, because we actually guarantee placements. So let's say if we guarantee, like for our clients that we guarantee 8, we're probably sending 30 to 50 pitches for that client. So it just kind of depends on, how well the things are resonating with the host, if they have room, things like that. So just keep in mind that you're going to send quite a few pitches that you're not going to hear back from, or you're going to get no's on. And that's just a part of the process. Don't take it personally. Okay. After this training, listen to a couple more of the podcasts you're interested in, do that podcast piggyback strategy, and then send an actual pitch. You guys have all the tools to do it. DM me on Instagram. You can follow me at PublicityxChristina with who you pitch. I can't wait to hear and celebrate with you, because sending the pitch is a big deal. Okay. Like getting the yes is of course an even bigger deal, but just sending your first pitch is honestly a really big deal. And then book a call if you're interested in having me do this on your behalf. I do this one-on-one for clients, or I have a VIP day where I train staff members on how to do this and get everything all ready to go. I also have my Hey Bitch, Let's Pitch membership, which is all about accountability and getting solopreneurs pitching themselves regularly. So we did it, guys. Oh my God. Jeez.
Well done, Christina. Thank you so much.
Whew. Sorry about that. My boy. I have another training this afternoon. I gotta go not talk to anybody for a few hours. That'll be hard for me. Did anyone have any questions? I was hoping I could leave a couple of minutes at the end here for anything at the end. I know we really blew past that last part.
There's a ton of great content.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah. Steph, are you feeling inspired? Yeah, go ahead.
I think that a lot of guests, like assuming you get booked, I think one thing that I learned in hosting that was like such a great thing is what they call piggybacking. So it's like when a host asks you a question, you always want to kind of restart your statement with that question, and that will give you great sound bites. So if I'm like, hey, Perry, what's your favorite color? You don't want to just say orange. You want to be like, my favorite color is orange. So that, and obviously that's a ridiculous example and no one would use that as a soundbite, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just that
challenge accepted.
Skill, and it also will buy you time if like the host asks you a question and you are thrown off a little bit or you don't know what to say. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a really like bare bones, like if there's one thing I can, share with interviewing and back and forth, like that's probably one of the most important things I would think.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we don't get into how to be a great guest in this training, but things that Steph just said is very true, and that's something for our one-on-one members and everything like that. We obviously go through that kind of stuff as well. But you want to be as good a guest as you can and thinking as much as possible about how we talked about you're going to be repurposing this content, thinking about how you're going to talk and how you talk in sound bites, and also selling through the whole thing. So when I'm on a podcast, I'm regularly talking about, my one-on-one clients, my membership, this and that. Even though I'm not outright selling, this lets people know that, she has a membership. She does this one-on-one for clients as well. But putting that things kind of through is important as well to do when you're a guest, so that you're kind of, always making sure that it's known that like, hey, you can actually access me. Anything else?
Session has a question in the chat.
Well, then let me go to the chat. Oh yeah, just say it.
Yeah. Would you be able to share the deck?
Yeah.
A ton of really good content in here.
Good, thank you. Well, I know Perry recorded this, but I'm happy to share the link. Perry, I'll just share it with you, the link to the slides.
Okay.
And then you guys can share that there. And I'm always, I don't normally offer this up, but since you guys are my fellow masterminders, like seriously, if you have emails or questions about topics or something like that, I'm very, very happy to answer them. This is what I enjoy doing. And I truly think that the same voices have been in podcasts for a long time, and we need to get new voices out there, different voices out there, people talking about different things. This is what I'm really, really passionate about. So as much as I can get my fellow masterminders out there, that makes me really happy, for sure.
Awesome.
Thanks a ton, Christina. This is
Christina,
awesome.
Thank you so much. This is Monique.
This is great. Thank you.
Hi, Monique.
Super helpful, giving me a lot to think about, because I need to work on, what do I talk about myself? I'm much happier to help somebody else come up with their idea and their pitch and their little angle to help them cut through. So I'm going to work on it this week to try to, what is that thing that I could talk about without feeling so braggadocious?
It is a fine balance. And especially, I'll just say, as women, we find it very, very hard to do it a lot, to kind of pitch ourselves in the same way as sometimes men feel comfortable with. But the thing that I talk to my clients about is always remember, when you pitch and when you're a guest, the mindset of service over self-promotion. And that really seems to help people a lot. When I go in with the mindset of, I'm here to help people learn how to be a guest on podcasts so that they can get out in front of their ideal customer, as opposed to, look at me and how awesome I am. That helps me, because we all have those moments of like, I don't know, we all have the imposter syndrome. that comes up, and that happens before we pitch and things like that as well. And that's what a lot of my membership, my Hey Bitch, Let's Pitch membership is all about, accountability, because so many people feel that. I mean, I have people that join me and they're like, I've been sitting on my pitches for 2 years because I'm just too nervous to hit send. Because they fear the rejection. They don't want to talk about themselves in that way, this, like that. So the service over self-promotion is really the mindset that I think helps a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good start.
Good.
Service over self-promotion.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Excellent. So Christina, you're going to send me a link, and then I'll follow up with everybody with another copy of the workbook, the link, and a link to this recording.
So I'll send the slides link. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you everyone for your time. I know an hour and a half is a lot of time to give, but hopefully you found a lot of value in it, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
and good luck
great.
next session.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you. I know I got a couple hours. I'm going to go sit in silence.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Okay, everybody, we'll see you next week in our regular sessions.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
everybody.
Thanks,
Everyone,
Christina.
have a great week. Take care.